Thanks to some recent improvements to the cloth simulator in Blender, you can now create some really nice looking curtains relatively quickly in Blender. So in this video, we'll start by making a simple ruffled curtain, then adding in some pinch pleats for a more nicer interior aesthetic. Then we'll go over some quick variations like making the curtain drag along the floor, tying it up against a wall, and then finish with some texturing and adding translucency to the shader and everything else for that nice final look. So let's get started. With a brand new scene open, we are going to delete everything and replace it with a plane, which will become our curtain. So first of all, we want it to be vertical. So hit R, then X, and then just type in 90, and it'll be 90 degrees. So the cloth simulator will work off of the geometry that you have available, and currently 4 vertices is not enough. So we're going to right click it and say subdivide. And that's not enough either. So we're going to change this little option here where my head is and change the number of cuts to be 100. And this I've generally found is perfect for a curtain. So with that done, if we went to the physics panel here and then just enabled cloth, just click it with the default settings, hit spacebar, you would see that it is actually cloth that is simulating. It's not doing anything particularly interesting, it's just falling. So the first thing we need to do is make sure that it is hanging from the rail. That doesn't have to physically be an object that is a rail. You can just select part of your mesh and make that the pinned part down here. So underneath shape, you've got some pin option, a pin group, which we don't have set up. So you need to go to the object data properties, and then underneath vertex group, we're going to click the plus button right there. So now in edit mode, we want to select the part of the mesh which should be pinned. So I'm going to select this top edge here by holding down Alt and then just left clicking on that edge there. And I also just realized I don't know if it's a new thing in 8.3, but you can like double click it now and it'll select like the whole boundary. I don't know, maybe I've missed that before, but I thought that was cool. Anyway, select that edge there, and then we're just gonna hit assign. And what this means is that if you went to the weight paint group, you could visualize it, but everything else is blue, and then there's a little bit at the top there's red, which means that that is the entire group. So now, cloth panel, we should see from the drop down, we should see the group appear. And now if we hit spacebar, you'll see even less interesting things happen. It is actually simulating. The base of it's moving. It's basically like stretching just like a little bit. But that's good. It's doing what it should. It's hanging there. It's hanging there. So now's the fun bit. We get to animate that top rail there collapsing. And when we do that, because the rest of the mesh here is basically just driven entirely by the cloth simulator, it will be forced to collapse and create the look of the curtain. It's actually really clever. It's like you only have to really worry about the top rail, and then provided you do that well and you let the cloth sim do its cloth sim thing, it'll look like a curtain. So that's really cool. So what we want to do is we want to animate this collapsing in. And the way we're going to do that is down here on the same object data panel, we're going to create a shape key. Now, a shape key, if you've never used them before, don't worry. They're typically used a lot in animation. Essentially, what it enables you to do is the first shape key you create becomes your sort of base, your base object. And then every shape key you add after that becomes a variation of that base shape key. So the basis, and then you've got key 1 or whatever you want to call it. Now, if I went into edit mode, for example, and let's just, don't copy me, but let's just, as an example, if I just made that like that, now this value here, this 0 value, or this one there, it now changes, from the 0 value is the base mesh, and then the 1 value is the new variant of that mesh. So what that means is that you can create keyframes within here. Like if you wanted like a speaker to be like boom, 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 boom. You know, it's a very easy way to do that. You could just create a shape key and then like, you know, drop in keyframes, move along, add another keyframe, etc. So we're going to do this, but obviously not that variant. We're going to create another variant, and all we're going to do is we're just going to collapse that. Now, if we were to scale this in like this, it would scale it in the center, like both sides would collapse inwards, which isn't what we want. I just want it to collapse on one going to one edge basically. So up here, select the top left-hand corner, and I'm going to hit Shift S and then go cursor to selected. Now, selecting that edge there, I'm going to change the pivot point to be the 3D cursor, which means now when I scale, it is scaling directly to that 3D cursor. Okay, and I'm just going to, holding down Control as I scale to 0.5 exactly. That's it. I'll just do that. So back into object mode, you'll see that we're only seeing the original mesh there. And that's because the key 1 is set to 0. When I turn this all the way up to 1, you can see that that line there, I mean, you won't be able to see it because edit mode will only show you like it doesn't show you the value, it shows you what that key looks like. So if I was in the basis, this is the basis, this is the key. Anyways, point is 0 is the curtain is like fully open, and then 1 is it's collapsed in. So that's great. We've done it. We've done the hard bit. Now all we need to do is create a keyframe at 0 at frame 1. Okay, and then we need to just sort of pull out to about enough time for the cloth simulator to, you know, figure out what it's doing, which would be 50 frames seems to work okay. I'm going to set this to 1 and then add another keyframe. So now, if we were to play this back, we should see magic happen, assuming we've done everything correctly, which it has. So that's it. Basically, that's the basics of how you make a curtain. There's a few things we will change to improve it, but you can see that that's the desired effect. Like, I mean, you could imagine if you had to sculpt this by hand, it'd be a lot of work, a lot of fooling around, but, you know, provided you do this top part correctly and it collapses the way a curtain should collapse, then everything else, the cloth is forced to follow that shape, and it's pretty cool. So, okay, one big thing to note is that if you were to zoom in, you might see it. I don't know if you can actually, but the cloth can overlap itself currently, and that is because underneath collisions, self collisions is turned off by default. So we want to keep that on, and the distance, it's a big margin by default. Yeah, I like to go like 0.002 or 0.001 if you can get away with it. And also the simulation quality of the collisions. We're going to do a little bit more with collisions later on. I find a higher quality leads to less sort of like stuttering or problems that might occur, and it doesn't add that much extra to the cloth sim. So now that you've done that, if you were to play it back, you should see that the cloth would actually interact. I don't think there is much interaction at this point. I mean, it's collapsing the mesh to like half of what it was before, but yeah, any area that was overlapping before will no longer be, which is nice. Yeah, that's pretty good. A couple of things that could improve the overall look. So the vertex mass is the number of vertices on your plane multiplied by that, 300 grams. So we've got like 10,000 vertices. So this is one heavy curtain, essentially. We don't want it to be like what the real world weight is, because the simulator is not that accurate, but I just want to reduce it by 3 to like 0.1. So it's still a heavy curtain, but not as heavy. The other setting is the compression, which is kind of like compression is, you know, whether the curtain can do what it's doing right now. So with a higher amount, it will kind of create like larger billowy folds or kind of thing that can kind of like wrap around. I don't know, kind of like a cardboard, right? Like a stiff cardboard that could kind of like bend like that. Anyways, we want to set that to be lower. So I don't know. If you went all the way to 1, it'd be kind of like cloth, but I want there to be like a little bit of compression to it. And the final one is that bending amount there, that's 0.5. Yeah, that's really the biggest effect over most cloth simulations. I generally find, like, same with the couch, if you watch the couch tutorial, like most of these settings don't do a lot, but the bending one does do a lot. And it really depends on what sort of curtain you want to go for. If you want something that's like really flimsy, like a piece of, what's something that's flimsy? A tissue, right? If you want it to look as like detailed as a tissue, then yeah, go like extremely low. But I want it to look like somewhat stiff fabric, not like starchy fabric, but like somewhere in between. So the default actually does look fairly good. Okay. One big thing that will make a big difference to how your curtain looks is the top, the pleating. So what we have right now is we just have the vertices sort of like mushing together, and it's forcing the mesh to create those folds there. But for interiors, generally, the fancier the interior, the more likely it is that there would be pleats, which is like this. So I found this little reference diagram on Pinterest. Believe it or not, there's more to curtains than just, hey, I'll have a curtain, thanks. It's what sort of pleat would you like in your curtain? And yeah, believe it or not, interior design, they really do care about this. I posted my first version on Twitter, and then someone said, but can you achieve a pleat effect? And I was like, And I tried all these different methods to I was dedicated to trying to figure it out. And then I realized it's actually a lot easier than I was doing. Anyways, so the current version is kind of like a rod pocket, maybe. It's kind of like ruffled. It's like a lace underlay of a curtain that's sort of like in the background where it doesn't matter. This sort of thing would be totally fine. But for something that's going to look nice and presentable for an interior, we want to go for something that looks a little better, like a pinch pleat. There's also, there's double pleat curtains, and then there's triple pleat. So this one here is the triple pleat because it's got triple folds. We don't want to go that fancy. I think the double pleat is actually more common than the triple pleat. I could be wrong, but anyways, we're just going to go with the double pleat. So the way that we go about achieving this is actually quite easy. And the way we do it is again, just with this single row of vertices. It just controls basically the entire simulation. So it's currently in a straight line, but if you think about what is a pinch pleat, it's essentially that line it's adding in sort of a zigzag folded pattern. So if we model that, then the rest of the fabric will be forced to follow it. So the way we do this is this line here we want to keep, but everything else we don't need that, and it's just going to obstruct this next step. So hitting Control I to invert it, and then just hit H to hide it so that we can just focus on this line here. And what we want to do now is create a pleat. And we want to create a whole string of them along it. So if you think of, what is a pleat? It's got one bit that's straight out, then it goes in, then it goes out, then it goes in again. Then there's a big long sort of gap before the next pinch starts. So that is what we want to emulate. So this end point here, this is the end of the curtain, sort of it's against the railing. There's going to be a pinch pleat to start. So I'm going to deselect that one vertice there. And then with the rest of this edge selected, if I just move this up to be almost vertical, but not quite, because it's going to be like a sort of a zigzag accordion effect, until I've got that. And I want it to be roughly the same distance as from here to here as from here to here. And I'll show you why that's important a little later on. But anyways, so the whole edge selected, then I just deselect this, and then I go and bring that all back. And then I deselect this, and then I bring the entire thing forward, deselect it one more time, and then I bring that to there. Now, there needs to be a gap before the next pinch starts. So deselect, deselect, deselect. How big of a gap do you want? How many pinches do you want in your curtain is really the question. Look at some reference and maybe count the pinches. I don't know if you want to go that detailed. Every curtain's different. Like there's bigger curtains and there's thinner curtains. So, anyway, it's up to you. But I'm just going to leave a gap of that many. So I deselect that, and then I go 1, 2, 3 vertices gap, and then I'm going to add another pinch right here. So deselect that, bring that in to there, like so. Okay, now we could continue that all the way along, but I want to test the theory to show, to see if it actually works, because I think that's actually a good idea for all of you following along. By the way, what I just did then was I went into object mode whilst I was on frame 130. Now, this is a very annoying feature, maybe it's called. Not a bug, it's a feature. But it's frozen. And the reason it's frozen is that it is now trying to simulate of frame 130 all the changes that I just made. What do you think would happen to the cloth simulator? Obviously mayhem. So it's now just going to spider out a whole bunch of things. It's very annoying. But okay. I shift left arrowed, and so it went back to frame 1. We didn't see it. But anyways, it's very annoying. Basically, the point is when you make an edit to your mesh, make sure that you're on frame 1 before you go back to object mode. Otherwise, it'll try to simulate up to that, and Blender will freeze. It's annoying. Okay. Anyways, now that I've done that, let's hit play and let's see what we get. So it's about right here. So yeah, essentially, we didn't even have to make make a new shape key or anything like that. We just went with what is already there. And of course, it's now forcing it to do some pleats. So let's zoom in here so that we can actually see what's going on. So right there, we can see we've got like sort of an accordion effect happening with our mesh. And it's doing some sort of like weird thing along the edge there, which isn't too bad. But if we go into shade smooth, it can actually be a little bit easier to understand. But the theory should work okay. Now, you might have problems sometimes if, let's go make sure we're on frame 1, if there is a bigger gap. Oh, I guess I should hide the rest of it. Control I, hide there. If you ever have a bigger gap like here, like if this was like out here, for example, what that's going to do is it's like it's stretching the mesh beyond what is possible. The only reason that this pin group is, and like we're allowed to move these vertices wherever we want outside of the simulation, is because it's part of the pinned group and we've got our own little animation happening to it. But the rest of the mesh has to follow this. So my point is that if any of these edges, like the distance between there and there, if it's bigger than the distance between here and here, or even smaller, things can go awry, essentially. So we want to make sure that the same distance from here to here is the same as the distance from roughly from here to here. So I'm looking at sort of this grid line there, you can sort of see, right? And I'm just trying to get it to sort of match there to there as from there to there. So that's what I'm going to try to aim for. So now that we've done that, the rest of it is essentially, it's repeating this process. 1, 2, 3, and then doing this. Now, unfortunately, you can't use an array or a repeat action or anything that we would normally use because we're doing something with the shape key. You can't delete the rest of the mesh and then recreate like one part of the pinch pleat and then duplicate. It just doesn't work like that. You have to actually physically change. This is one of like the few times in Blender where, yeah, you really can't like utilize the fact that you're working with something digitally to do the work for you. You have to actually manually do the work as if this was real fabric or something. But it's not hard. It's not hard. It's just time consuming to go along here. So I'm going to speed this up. And while that's going on, did you know that there is a library of over 1,000 public domain museum artifact models that you can download for free? Well, you would if you joined my newsletter. Every week, I collect the most interesting 3D tutorials, models, videos, or news articles, and send them to subscribers of my newsletter. So, to make sure you don't miss the next freebie that I find, click the link in the description to join my free newsletter. And there we go. We have a repeating pleat going across everything. So making sure I'm on frame 1 before I go into object mode. And then now let's play back our animation and see how we did. Ta-da! Now, in this case, by the way, I pre-cached that. That was not simulating in real time. It's definitely, it's faster now, but it's not as fast as that. Anyways, what happened before I evidently screwed up the cache by moving the frames around is it was all sort of like just sort of mashing in there. And the reason for that is that when we created this accordion effect, because we were basically moving each of these points closer and closer together, this distance here has shrunk. So originally it was like up to that blue line. It was exactly like, it was shrinking the curtain like 50%. It's now shrunk it to like 25%. So all that fabric is being compressed into such a tight area, it doesn't fit, right? So I'm just going to scale that up to be roughly where it was before. And now let's see how that looks now. Okay, so now it's a lot better, right? It's not mashing in there. There is some weirdness happening at the top here. And this might be one of those cases where some of these vertices are moving more than what is plausible. but also it's the end of the curtain. And even in real curtains, real reference, the end of the curtain, I mean, just because of the way fabric works, if the points are sort of pointed in like this, the rest of the fabric is gradually going to sort of like taper out. So you can see this edge here sort of goes out in this direction. This edge here goes out in that direction a little bit. So yeah, the ends of the curtain generally will look a little bit different to the middle part, but there's something about this that just looks a little weird. So frame 1, I'm just going to come in here and just make sure that none of these points look wildly out of place. Like if one of this was like out there, that would be a case of like, okay, there's going to be some serious stretching happening there or something like that. But you know, maybe I'll move that in a little closer, maybe that in a little closer. I don't know if that'll make much of a difference at all. One other thing you can do is actually increase the quality steps. So if you followed the couch tutorial series, you know that the quality steps is basically, it's like it's subdividing the frame, right? So if the fabric was moving from here to here in one frame, well, if there was something in between there, it would now be clipping through it or doing some weird like mashup thing, right? So by subdividing the frame, it's now like basically simulating the cloth like five times, right? For the number 5 between each frame, which means you're going to get less problems. So 5, you'd think it'd be enough, but no, 10 is generally what I find to be better. And as well as that, you'd also remember that the cloth sim collision, I'm trying to scroll down whilst it's simulating. I set the quality there to 5, and I believe that's a similar situation to the subdividing thing, but specifically for collision. Could be wrong, but you know, I think that's what it's doing. So there we go. Now this looks it looks a lot better. I'm going to wait till it gets to frame 50. Something else you can try, by the way, like I picked 50 as the end point for our keyframe of the animation. But if you find like that the cloth is moving like really quick and like there's a big lag on the cloth that's sort of like going behind it and it's creating some sort of like problems there, then you can just like move the keyframe out, like maybe make the keyframe end at frame 80 or something like that. You can also play with these settings here. I actually, what do you know? I think while I paused the recording, I was playing with some settings, trying to get some bigger or smaller folds. But you know, some of these, I mean, honestly, like bending is probably going to make the biggest difference for how your curtain is going to look. But you know, I don't know. I generally find most of the defaults for fabric work pretty well. The big changes really come in that bending amount, but also the animation and other things that are going on with it, like the number of vertices you've got, etc. So keep that in mind. But anyways, I'm going to give this one final sim and let's see how that looks. And there we go. So roughly at around a frame 100, the curtain has sort of stabilized, it's doing its thing, and it looks pretty good. If you enable shade smooth, it is much easier to understand the detail. And then as well as that, you could also add a subsurf modifier after it, because there's really not enough geometry going on at the top here to understand the shape of the mesh. So subsurf will smooth that out and it'll look a lot nicer. You could also use simple subsurf if you wanted to not sort of round out those edges there. I don't really know what I'm doing in that case when it comes to like simple Catmull. I don't know which would actually be better. Maybe you should use an edge, a crease instead. I don't know. Anyways, but that looks fine. So brief pause here before we continue. Some of you may want to know how to make the curtain drag on the floor, so I thought I'd just quickly share that. You just make a plane with a collision physics enabled, and then you just animate that plane sliding underneath it. Pretty simple. And if you want the curtain to be tied back, cool variation you could play with. You start with a torus, cut it in half, extrude those pieces out, enable collision physics, and then animate that being pulled back. It'll probably get glitchy though, so just uncheck single-sided in the collision physics and it should animate fine. And with that out of the way, on to the rest of the tutorial. What we want to do is we want to apply our cloth sim, but keep in mind that once you apply it, you can't go back. I mean, you can undo it, but if you ran out of undos, you understand why that would be a problem. So if you want to keep a copy of this, what you should do before you apply it is Let's just turn off my subsurf so that it doesn't screw up. I'm going to hit Shift D on this current frame here. And you can see I've now got a screwed up mesh because it always does that when you duplicate it. Then I'm going to right click to cancel so that it should just place it, well, no, Shift D, but cancel the placement of it. So it should just put it where I dropped it. But evidently it's just like frozen, Blender. It's one of those annoying things. Yeah, there we go. You know, it always does this spider thing. Like, why can't Blender just go like, okay, obviously the middle of the frame, I shouldn't be simulating everything that came before it to get this spider effect and make the user wait. Anyways, point is now I've got a duplicate of this. Before I do anything, I'm going to select my the one that I want to keep, the one that I want to preserve, freeze. I want to freeze. I'm going to apply my cloth sim. Oh, this message says you can't apply it because you've got shape keys. So go to your shape keys thing here and just delete these two shape keys. Then apply your cloth sim. Don't apply your subsurf because you want to be able to control that yourself later on. And now your crazy, weird, freaky cousin, we can now move that to its own collection. And we'll just call this new collection hide. You can call it archive, hide, whatever. Sometimes I call it unapply, whatever, but it's just hidden there. So if I ever wanted the original cloth sim for whatever reason, I could use it there. But look at that. We now have a curtain, which is pretty good. But some of you may notice, if you are interior designers yourself, you might be thinking like, hey, okay, the pleat looks okay, but it doesn't look like the top of a curtain. Because the top of a curtain, essentially all we've done is we've created the pleat up to sort of like right here, right? But the top of the curtain, it's not just like pinched in, but then it also comes out as it goes towards the top. You couldn't really do that very well with the cloth sim. I mean, I don't know if you could try it. It would sort of like flop over and it would just be annoying. So instead, what we're going to do is Alt-H, bring in the rest of the mesh. We're just going to do that manually. So I'm going to select this edge loop here, and I'm going to extrude that up along the Z axis, like so, to be, you know, that top bit, however long that top bit is, somewhere around there. And then that's already pretty good. It already looks better. But something else you could do if you really wanted to be known for your detail is it sort of goes out and it kind of pulls out a little bit like that. So if you select those two pieces like that and then hit S, then X, bounding box, S, X, it should now create that kind of look, right? So I'm going to do that for all of these one by one. I mean, it doesn't take that long. If you go into edge select mode by just hitting the number 2, then you can just select the edges a lot faster. And I'll also show you next just a couple of things to tighten up some of the shapes around here. Tighten up the graphics, you know? Graphics are getting sloppy. Never forget that advert. Just gonna tighten up the graphics. If you haven't seen that video, look up on YouTube, tighten up the graphics. It's like one of those early college gaming degree things. It's basically a scam. But anyways, I think this is not even the first time I've mentioned that in a tutorial. I can't help but bring it up. Tighten up the graphics. Anyways, so that looks better. Looks much more like a curtain. Now we've got a rounded edge here, which is not desirable. So yeah, as I mentioned before, I never noticed it before, but you can now not only just select an edge by hitting Alt and clicking on it, but if you hit it twice, it selects the entire boundary, which is super cool. I think it's something I was like bitching on about on Twitter a few months ago. I don't know. It's cool that, I don't know if it'll actually be applicable for that case, but anyways, now that I've done that, if I hit Shift E, Shift E? Yeah, crease, there we go. And Shift E and then just pull your mouse out and you can see top left-hand corner, it'll say 1, or you can just type in the number 1. And now we'll have a tighter edge there. And then you could also, I'm just gonna try this. I'm gonna add a crease here as well. See if that does anything to that pleat effect. Yeah, it kind of looks like there's like a rail behind it, doesn't it? That looks kind of cool. I like it. Awesome. So now all that's left to do is the material. So since a curtain sits in front of a window, that's going to play a big part in how it looks. So I just set up a very basic room with a hole in it for the window, and then I had some blue light coming in through the window. Also set up a portal over the window, just an area lamp, check portal, and that'll just speed up the interior rendering. Anyways, so we have our lovely curtain here. And it looks very, very plain. So this is where it's actually kind of fun. It's the fun bit. You get to choose the color and texture of the curtain, and that really plays a big role in the interior design. So if you know what you're doing, you could use one of the sort of bold, splashy patterns like some of these companies do. You can do some fun stuff with it. It could become like a focal element for a room, or it could become just something that sort of like blends into the background, like one of these, something like that. So that's what we're going to do. It's up to you what style of curtain you go for. You can get your textures from anywhere. Obviously, I'm going to be getting these ones from Polygon. We've got a whole range. If you haven't seen our video on what makes these specifically special, you can click up there and see why I at least recommend you use procedurally made fabric, because it is just far, far sharper than photographed fabric. But anyways, so I'm going to be using this one here, Fabric Upholstered Blended Twill. I'll put the link for this in the description. It is a premium texture. If you want to play along with a free one, you just get a free account and you can get this one. It's got all the maps and everything there. It's definitely a different style, but some different visual movement with this pattern here than this one. But yeah, either one should be okay. Now, actually making it is fairly simple. We don't need like all the maps. We really just need a couple. So I'm setting up I guess I should turn on this little tool here so you can see what I'm pressing. Whoops. Okay. So all we want to do, this is the what comes with the download. I only needed a 1K. We're going to be tiling it so often that, 1K will be more than enough. And it comes in 3 colors. So with the download, you'll get 3 different colors. It's obviously up to you which one you use. I'm just going to use the first one. So just drag that in. You can drag in image textures straight into Blender, and it just creates a node for you, which is really handy. Okay, so I just put it in right there. Now you can see that that's very low res. We'll fix that. The other map we want to use is the normal map. The rest of them we don't really need. Like you could if you want to, but it's really overkill for something that is like going to be so scaled as this. Really, the bump and the color is where most of the detail is going to come from. So normal map, set it to non-color data, and then we just need to add a normal map node to convert that to the right use. All right, and then finally to scale it, so I just selected that node and hit Control T, which you can only do if you have the node wrangler enabled. So make sure you enable that, and then you can select it, hit Control T. Then what you can do, connect this to both of the maps so they're both scaled. I'm just going to dragging down with my mouse there to select all 3 values. I'm just going to type in 10, which as I zoom in there, you can see looks much better. So it's a lot more low res. Okay, so the light is coming in from behind, and that's really the big feature of it. So we want to use subsurface scattering, which you normally use for like characters, right? Like getting the, I don't know if you could see it in the video maybe, but the light goes through the ear, right? Like that kind of effect. It enables that, but it also is the way to actually have any sort of translucency in objects. The old method was to use like a translucent shader and like sort of mix it around, but really the best way is to use subsurface scattering. So if you increase this, you will see almost nothing. Now the reason for this is that it needs thickness to your object here, and we don't have any thickness. It is one single plane. So much like if you're making a glass object, it needs to have 2 planes as well. It needs to be a solid object. So anyways, we're just going to add in a solidify modifier, and look at that. It is now being lit from behind. Let me move this over here so that we can see both parts of it. So you can see that where this is where the wall is, right behind it. And you can see that it's working. Now it's overkill at the moment, and it's also got a red tint because by default the subsurface radius RGB values, it puts more prominence to the red values so that it gets more blood. Like, I guess it's designed like by default for characters. So we want to drag down on those values, and I'm going to type in 0.01. So much smaller in scale because this is now suited for a curtain. And that might actually be too small. I'm not sure exactly why. Maybe the light is not as strong as in my previous example, but let me try a different value. Let's go 0.1. Okay, 0.1 will work, and then I can dial back. Basically, this value here and this value, they sort of work in tandem. That's my sort of understanding of it. So, you know, you could go like 0.5 here and then dial this all the way back, and it would be similar to if you went 0.1 here and then sort of dial this about that, if that sort of makes sense. Anyway, you just sort of get it to somewhere where it starts to sort of look okay. Now the light that's coming through there actually by default will be kind of a white color, and that's because it's going to use subsurface color. So if we drag that and put that into there, our color map, now it will actually be using the value of the color map as we want. Now the actual color of your curtain, it comes in this sort of military gray, perhaps you could call it that. By the way, I'm going to change my light not to be blue. I'm just going to make it white because it's better for, for realism, you want to go for the color of the sky, which would be blue. But in our case, we're doing color work. So yeah, I should have just kept it white. But anyways, you can change the color of your textures very easily. You don't have to, pick a fabric that's like, oh, I want a specific purple color. I have to find one that's purple by default. It's very easy to change the color. You just add in a hue saturation value node, drop that in here, and then your hue value, you just change that until you get the desired color that you want. It's really that simple. So I'm going to go for like a blue color. So I'm going to go all the way there, and I could increase the saturation to get more of a blue. I could dial back the value, which is sort of the darkness of it, to make it sort of a more muted color. And there you go. So you can see we've now got translucency, right, which we can drag up or down. There's no right value for a curtain because you'll know that there are blackout curtains, and then there are the thin sort of wispier ones, right? These sort of lace. Yeah, kind of like lace curtains, which are designed to just sort of, in fact, that's probably what they're for, to sort of filter the light coming in through the room, almost like a light box, right? Like it just adds softness to the room. So actually in my example, I actually created two curtains like this. And the one at the background was just like a lace, just a light lace white thing. And that way you don't have to model an exterior. It allows you to have an open window, but just have lace curtain there, and it's white. And so it's you can't see out the window because there's a curtain in the way. And that is basically it, guys. So one little tiny thing you can do, which is just a little extra touch of realism, is to add in, because the curtain itself, it's typically been folded over at the bottom, and then also the edge here, basically it'll be thicker, right? So there won't be as much light going through in that area. But rather than folding it around on itself and making all this extra geometry, all you need to do is, I'm in face select mode, and I'm holding down Alt as I do this, is just select the areas that you want to have that. So all this area here, all this area here, and you just want to make a duplicate of your material. I should have just gone on duplicate material plus, okay. So I've duplicated it, and then I'm just going to set my subsurf to 0 like that. And then I just hit assign. And if done correctly, oh, hang on a second. Hold the fort. What did I do? Did I not have this set to blue? Oh, that was weird. Was I not changing the color of it before? Hang on, I'm very lost there. But anyways, now it's all blue. And then this one here, yeah. I mean, there's no subsurf for this one, so it doesn't really matter. But anyways, there should be now, it should look thicker at the bottom there, right? And that edge there as well. And another slightly extra little thing at the top, that's probably even more obvious. You'll see some stretching there. And the reason for that is that the plane by default will come UV unwrapped, but because we added an extra edge and extruded that up, that extra bit there at the top won't be UV unwrapped. It's just going to be stretched. So the solution is to, in UV edit mode, select everything, then click this little button at the top there, UV sync selection. And then if you just take that top edge there, selected that, you can see it's in the exact same spot as the one beneath it. So you just drag that up to be roughly like that. And then if you take a look at that, I don't know why I clicked on material preview, but anyways, yeah, you can see that it's properly UV unwrapped. There you go. And of course, for your, for extra realism, you want to model a rail. So I just did that with some cylinders, and then I added in toruses as rings to sort of go for every single pleat, and then I added a smaller torus below it to connect to that pleat, which is just an extra little tiny bit of detail. And also, if you followed my couch tutorial as well, you'll know that you could also use this texture from Polygon, which adds sort of like a very subtle wrinkle effect, because every fabric, unless it's perfectly ironed by a robot, will have some form of little wrinkles. Even in a five-star hotel, you'll probably see wrinkles in the curtains. So that can just add just a little touch of something to it. But yeah, that's basically it. So hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more like this, go ahead and hit subscribe. If you haven't watched the couch tutorial series, I highly recommend it. That goes fully into cloth and physics and all that kind of stuff. But thank you for watching.